They say some traumas never leave you. Mine rides the rails every night. A phantom clatter in the quiet of my apartment. A constant reminder of the sister I lost to a train. To a journey from which she never returned. To a journey from which she never returned. I took a job. Or rather, an assignment. To document the Ebon Line. A ghost train still rumored to run its forgotten route from Boston to Chicago. Armed with little more than my camera, a skeptical mind, and a crumpled note bearing 3 cryptic rules for survival that I wouldn't receive until the point of no return. The station itself, Boston South Station by name but a forgotten carbuncle of the past by nature, was a relic smelling of damp stone, ozone, and something metallic like old blood. The departure board flickering erratically, displaying destinations that hadn't existed for decades, their faded gold lettering mocking my journalistic curiosity. It was only later I learned about the last journalist who boarded this train, the one who thought the rule about the smoking car was just a charming old legend, and whose notebook, filled with increasingly frantic scrawls, was found months later near me, a stretch of abandoned track in rural Ohio. My name is Vincent Calder, photojournalist, collector of lost highways and forgotten byways, and perhaps a chaser of ghosts, though I'd never admit it. My sister, Hilara, vanished 10 years ago. One overnight train, a mundane trip, and then nothing. No trace, just an empty seat and a travel bag left behind. It's a cold, hollow ache that drives me, a quiet obsession beneath the professional veneer. Platform 9 was a joke I might have made, if the grim, echoing emptiness of this forgotten wing of South Station hadn't already leached all humor from the air. The track listed under Ebon Line was dark, the buffers at its end seemingly swallowed by an oppressive shadow. Then, with a sound like a dying giant's sigh, a hiss of steam and the mournful groan of ancient metal, the train materialized more than arrived. It was old, undeniably so. Carriages of a deep, lusterless black, their windows opaque with grime and decades of neglect, reflecting the station's few flickering lights like cataract-clouded eyes. It didn't glide, it lurched into place, the air around it chilling perceptibly. A woman in a severely cut, dark uniform, the fabric oddly stiff, stood by the nearest carriage door. Clara Reese, her name tag read. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable, a mask of professional indifference that didn't quite reach her dark, troubled eyes. She took my pre-booked e-ticket confirmation from my phone with a gloved hand, barely glancing at it, then handed me a stiff cardstock ticket and a small folded piece of cheap paper. Compartment 7. Car B, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper, avoiding my gaze. The rules are for your benefit, Mr. Calder. Adherence is advised. And before I could ask what rules, she turned to the next Wraith-like passenger, materializing from the station's gloom. The rules. I unfolded the paper. 3 stark, typewritten lines. 1. If you hear children laughing in the dining car after midnight, do not investigate the sound. 2. Do not look out the windows during tunnel passages. You might see things running alongside the train that shouldn't exist. 3. Do not play cards with passengers in the smoking car. They've been playing the same game since 1923, and the stakes keep getting higher. A chill, unrelated to the station's damp, traced its way down my spine. This was elaborate, even for a ghost train gimmick. Car B was dimly lit, the fixtures antique brass, the patterned carpet worn thin, almost threadbare in places. A lingering scent hung in the air. Stale cigar smoke, a faint, cloying floral sweetness, like decaying funeral wreaths. And underneath it all, the sharp tang of rust. My compartment, number 7, was small, claustrophobic, with a narrow bunk and a single, grimy window. As I stowed my bag, I saw an elderly woman, Mrs. Bellamy, seated in a small alcove down the corridor, her needles clicking softly as she knitted with a yarn the color of ash. She glanced up, her eyes like faded denim, and offered a thin smile. "Welcome aboard the Ebon Line, young man. She always takes her passengers where they need to go." Eventually, her words, meant to be benign, perhaps, landed with an unsettling weight. Just as I was settling in, a man appeared at my open compartment door. He was perhaps in his early 40s, dressed in well-kept, slightly old-fashioned clothes, with an engaging smile and intelligent eyes. "Henry Graves," he introduced himself, offering a hand. "Fellow traveler, and something of a railway historian. This old line is a particular fascination of mine." His charm was immediate, disarming. "Quite the relic, isn't she? Full of quirks." The train gave a sudden, violent lurch, a metallic scream, and then began to move. Slowly at first, then gathering a ponderous rhythmic momentum. The station lights slid away. A station light slid away as we entered the first short, Stygian tunnel, a sudden blackness plunging us into a momentary sensory void. I glanced at the window. For a horrifying, disorienting instant, I saw a face, pale, elongated, its features indistinct, pressed against the glass, keeping perfect pace with the train, its eyes like burning cinders fixed on mine. Then, just as quickly, we were out of the tunnel, the face gone, leaving only my own startled reflection. A trick of the light. Exhaustion. It had to be, but the image, seared onto my retinas, was the first crack in my carefully constructed skepticism. The rhythm of the train was a hypnotic, unsettling lullaby. Clack, clack, groan, clack, clack, hiss. Sleep was elusive. The silence between the metallic sounds was too deep, too expectant. Each creak of the carriage seemed to carry a whisper I couldn't quite decipher. I tried to review my notes, but the words on the small, folded paper kept superimposing themselves over my thoughts. The rules. So specific. So illogical. Midnight approached. The hands on my watch, an old analog I favored for its reliability, seemed to crawl. Then, precisely as the minute hand clicked onto the 12, I heard it. Laughter. Faint at first, then clearer. Children's laughter. High-pitched, innocent, yet somehow hollow. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the dining car, which I knew was several carriages forward, and should have been closed. Dark, and deserted hours ago. The sound was clear, impossibly so, over the train's own considerable noise. An icy prickle danced across my skin. Rule number 1. Do not investigate. My journalistic instincts warred with a primal, instinctual dread. I found myself standing, moving towards my compartment door, an almost magnetic pull drawing me towards the sound. Just as my hand reached the cold brass knob, a soft knock came from the other side. It was Henry Graves. "Everything all right, Vincent?" he asked, his voice a low, concerned murmur. His eyes, however, held a subtle, unreadable watchfulness. This old train plays tricks on the ears, you know. Drafts, the way the sound carries. Best to stay put after midnight. The corridors can be treacherous. He didn't mention the laughter, but his gentle steering me back from the door, his casual dismissal of tricks on the ears, felt like a carefully orchestrated reinforcement. I retreated, the laughter continuing for another 10 minutes, each peal a tiny hammer blow against my resolve, before fading into the train's rhythmic clatter as if it had never been. But the silence it left behind was heavier, more menacing. Later, the train plunged into a tunnel far longer than the first. The rhythmic clatter of wheels on rails deepened, becoming a resonant subterranean roar. The lights in my compartment flickered, dimmed, then held at about half their previous strength, casting long, dancing shadows. The air grew noticeably colder, a damp, earthy chill seeping in. Rule number 2. Do not look out the windows. I squeezed my eyes shut, leaning my head back against the worn velvet of the seat. But the blackness behind my eyelids was no comfort. The window, I knew, would now be a perfect dark mirror, an irresistible compulsion. A morbid curiosity made me open them. The glass was a sheet of polished obsidian, reflecting the dim interior of my compartment. And then I saw them, not clearly, never clearly, but as shimmering, heat-haze distortions in the reflection, just behind where I sat. 2, no, 3 figures, tall, unnaturally thin, their limbs elongated, their heads too small, featureless ovoids. They weren't in the compartment, but reflected as if they were, standing silently watching me. My breath hitched. I spun around, my heart hammering. Nothing. The compartment was empty, save for me and the oppressive, antique smell. I whipped my head back to the window. The reflections were gone. Only my own wide-eyed, pale face stared back. As we burst from the tunnel into the dim, moonlit landscape, the normal reflections returned. But the terror remained, a cold knot in my stomach. I felt contaminated, observed from a place I couldn't see. The next morning, if one could call the perpetual dimness of the Ebon Line morning, I encountered Carriages again, as she glacially collected breakfast orders. Her face set in the same impassive mask. As she handed me a lukewarm coffee, her fingers brushed mine, and I felt a small folded piece of paper pressed into my palm. Another menu, this one older, more stained. On its back, scrawled in faded blue ink in a tight, elegant script, were Spanish phrases. Los reflejos minte, reflections li. Te ven a través del cristal. They see you through the glass. Los niños perdieron sus nombres. The children lost their names. Her coded confirmation. Her silent scream. Further down the corridor, I saw the kid from the station, the one with the look of a runaway. Tyler Brooks, I'd learn later. He was leaning against a grimy window, headphones on, seemingly oblivious, though his foot tapped a frantic rhythm. He made a sarcastic comment as I passed. Something about the 5-star service, but his eyes, when they met mine for a fleeting second, held a flicker of something lost, something anciently tired, that no teenager should possess. Later that day, trying to distract myself, I felt something under the cushion of my seat. I pulled it out. A faded postcard. The picture, an idealized, hand-tinted image of a 1930s Chicago skyline. The message, in elegant cursive, read, "Dearest Arthur, the journey is unique. Looking forward to the game tonight. Wish me luck. Yours, Eliza." The postmark was smudged, unreadable, but the date clearly visible, October 23rd, 1931. My unease deepened, taking on a temporal, disorienting quality. This train wasn't just a relic. It felt like a piece of misplaced time. The Ebon Line rattled on, a metronome beating out a rhythm of slow-burning dread. The postcard from 1931, the disquieting certainty that the laughter, the figures in the glass, were not mere tricks of a tired mind. My journalistic skepticism was eroding, replaced by a gnawing, primal fear. I found myself drawn, again and again, to studying the 3 rules, searching for a logic, a pattern that remained maddeningly elusive. The smoking car. Rule number 3. It was located at the rearmost end of the train, past several increasingly dilapidated and darkened passenger carriages that seemed unoccupied, yet still carried the faint, lingering scent of long-dead occupants. A heavy oak door, its brass handle tarnished, barred the way. A thin, sweetish acrid smoke, not quite tobacco, curled from beneath it, carrying with it a faint, almost inaudible murmur, like hushed bets and the flick of cards. Henry Graves found me contemplating it, my hand hovering near the doorknob. Curiosity is a powerful current. Isn't it, Vincent? He said, his voice soft, almost conspiratorial. But some doors, well, they guard private parties. The occupants of that car are particular. An old tradition, they say. Best leave them to their game. His smile was reassuring, but his eyes held that familiar, disconcerting depth, as if he knew exactly what thoughts were coiling in my mind. Lighter. The door was ajar, just a crack. I don't know if it was left that way intentionally, a lure, or if the train's violent lurching had dislodged the latch. The pull was irresistible. I peered inside. The car was shrouded in a perpetual twilight, thick with a haze of that strangely sweet smoke. Silhouettes hunched around a large felt-topped table. 4, maybe 5 figures, their features lost in the gloom. The only clear detail was a hand, unnaturally pale, fingers long and graceful, dealing cards with a swift, almost serpentine precision. A gloved hand. The silence from within was more profound than any sound, broken only by the faintest whisper. Your recollection of her face, one shadowy figure murmured. Then softer still, from another, the key to your front door. I recoiled as if burned, a cold dread gripping my heart. The stakes, they weren't playing for money. I found Mrs. Bellamy in her usual alcove, her needles clicking a somber rhythm. The gray yarn she used seemed to absorb the dim light. I sat opposite her, needing some anchor, however frail. Mrs. Bellamy, I began, my voice huskier than I intended. The smoking car, those passengers, her needles stilled. She looked at me, her faded eyes filled with an ancient sorrow. When you hear the children's laughter, dear boy, she said, her voice a dry whisper, it often means someone else has forgotten the sound of their own. As for the card players, they began their game a long, long time ago. They wager pieces of themselves, you see, hoping to win back what they've already lost to the train. Her gaze drifted to the window, to the blur of the passing landscape. Some have been playing since before the Great War. The Great War. My skin crawled. Driven by a desperate need for an anchor in this swirling unreality, I sought out Henry again. Perhaps his historian's perspective could offer some rational framework. Well, this train, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's more than just old, isn't it? There are stories. Henry nodded, his expression thoughtful. Indeed. The Ebon Line has a layered history. Accidents, disappearances, folklore aplenty. He produced, with an almost theatrical flourish, a folder of brittle, yellowed newspaper clippings. Tales of a derailment in the Rockies in 23. A blizzard that trapped a train for weeks in 47. Passengers who simply stepped off and were never seen again. Each story, while unsettling, had a mundane official explanation. Yet, the dates, the recurring themes of vanishing, of temporal anomalies whispered in witness accounts, they formed a disturbing mosaic. From a locked drawer in what appeared to be an old conductor's station, now repurposed as a linen closet, he even unearthed a tattered, water-stained passenger manifest. This might interest your research, he said, handing it to me. Purported to be from a ghost run in 1931. I took it, my fingers trembling slightly. The paper was fragile, the ink faded. As I scanned a list of names under the dim, flickering emergency light in the corridor, my breath caught. Surnames, I recognized. Brooks, Bellamy, names of people I believed I had just encountered, decades out of time. And then, my own flashlight beam, weak and uncertain, illuminated a name that made my blood run cold. Its confident, looped signature stark against the faded ledger. Henry Graves, Esquire, destination Chicago, ongoing. Henry, standing beside me, coughed discreetly. Remarkable coincidence, isn't it? Names do echo down the years. He quickly pointed to another, less jarring entry on the page. A minor politician, a faded actress, but the image of his name, penned nearly a century ago, was burned into my mind. His charming demeanor now felt reptilian, his helpfulness a carefully constructed trap. The seed of suspicion had taken root and was rapidly growing into a monstrous certainty. Suddenly, the train lurched violently, plunging us into another tunnel, this one deeper, blacker than any before. A new kind of coldness permeated the carriage, a chill that felt less like temperature and more like an absence of life. Each tunnel passage on the Ebon Line was a descent into a deeper layer of unreality. This one was the worst yet. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels vanished, replaced by a thick, muffled silence, as if the train were moving through water, or perhaps through time itself. The lights in the corridor didn't just dim, they pulsed with a sickening greenish hue, casting our faces in corpse-like tones. I felt a wave of intense nausea, a dizzying sense of temporal vertigo. The very air thrummed with an unseen energy, and the faint, metallic scent I'd grown accustomed to was now overlaid with the unmistakable sharp odor of ozone, as if we were passing close to some immense, ancient electrical anachronism. I looked at my watch. The hands were spinning wildly, a blur. My phone, clutched in my hand, flashed no service, then displayed a date. October 27th, 1923. My heart hammered against my ribs. The decor of the carriage around me seemed to shift subtly. The worn velvet seats looked newer, less faded. The brass fixtures gleamed with a recent polish. A snatch of a song, a tinny, Charleston-esque melody, seemed to drift from an unseen gramophone. When we finally, shudderingly, emerged from the tunnel, the world outside was wrong. The moon was too large, the stars in unfamiliar constellations. The landscape that rushed past was not the flat plains of the Midwest I'd expected, but rugged, unfamiliar mountains. The illusion, or whatever it was, held for a breathless minute, then slowly, like a mirage dissolving, the familiar, mundane nightscape reasserted itself. But the feeling of dislocation, of having been unmoored for my own time, lingered, a cold residue of impossible experience. The conductor's presence was becoming more tangible. No longer just a feeling or a whisper. I'd catch glimpses, a hand, always gloved in pristine white, resting for a moment on a doorknob down the corridor before silently withdrawing. The distinct shadow of a peaked conductor's cap falling across the grimy window of an empty compartment as I passed. Once, as I drifted in a state of exhausted near sleep, I heard a voice, soft as rustling silk and old paper, right beside my ear. "Stick to the rules, son. They're the only tracks that lead out of the night." The voice was calm, authoritative, yet utterly devoid of human warmth. When I jolted fully awake, the compartment was empty, but the scent of old leather and something indefinably sterile, like a long-abandoned museum, hung faintly in the air. I found myself watching Tyler Brooks, the runaway, with a new, morbid fascination. He never seemed to eat from the meager offerings Clara provided. He never seemed to truly sleep, always propped in a corner, headphones on, though I doubted any music played through them. He hummed constantly under his breath, a simple, melancholic, almost childlike tune. It was strangely familiar, tugging at the edges of my memory, but I couldn't place it. One afternoon he looked directly at me, his eyes holding that unsettling ancient weariness. "Ever get the feeling you've been on this ride before?" he asked, then gave a short, harsh laugh that held no amusement, and walked away, the melody still on his lips. My confrontation with Henry about his name on the 1931 manifest had been met with smooth, plausible deniability. A grandfather, perhaps? Or just one of life's little coincidences. Vincent. This line is filled with them, but his smile didn't reach his eyes, and I noticed he subtly began to guide our conversations, our research, towards the supernatural, feeding me carefully selected local legends, almost grooming me to accept the impossible. He started to gently, almost imperceptibly, encourage me to bend the rules, A quick look into the dining car when the laughter starts, Vincent. For your story, surely no harm. His charm now felt like the iridescent shimmer on a patch of oil, attractive but treacherous. And then the tune, Tyler's tune. I found myself humming it, under my breath, while staring out at the endless dark landscape. It rose unbidden, a complete melody, as if it had always been there, dormant in my subconscious. The realization that it was the same tune Tyler hummed hit me with a jolt of cold fear. Where had I heard it? Why did it feel so integral? Later that evening, driven by a need to escape the oppressive atmosphere of my compartment, I walked the length of several carriages in a deserted section where the lights barely worked and dust lay thick as snow. I found something wedged beneath a loose seat cushion, a small, intricately carved wooden token, like something from an old board game. On one side, the initials MB were elegantly etched, and beneath them, the year 1923. Eliza and the postcard. I flipped it over, attached to the rough wood by a single, cruelly rusted thumbtack that still bore a faint dark stain, was a child's drawing, a crude, crayon depiction of a train window, and outside it, a monstrous, shadowy figure with elongated limbs and burning eyes, reaching for the train. The child inside the drawing was small, terrified, its mouth an O of silent screaming. The raw, visceral fear in that simple drawing was more terrifying than anything I had yet experienced. This wasn't folklore. This was testimony. The Ebon Line was a predator, and it was beginning to circle. Passengers were thinning. A nervous-looking salesman I'd shared a brief, uncomfortable silence with, in the corridor was gone, his compartment empty, his newspaper still folded on the bunk. Mrs. Bellamy, when I asked, merely sighed, her needles clicking a faster, more agitated rhythm. The train collects its fares, dear boy. Sooner or later. Her gray yarn seemed darker today, almost the color of a stormy sea. Then came a scream, high-pitched and abruptly cut off, from the direction of the dining car. It was well past midnight. I'd heard the faint, telltale children's laughter begin its ghostly serenade moments before. This time, someone had clearly broken the first rule. Later, I saw him. A young man I'd noticed earlier, a backpacker, probably on a cross-country adventure. He was being led, or rather, gently guided, by Clara Ruiz, his eyes wide, utterly vacant, a thin line of drool tracing from the corner of his mouth. He didn't respond when she spoke his name. He simply stared ahead, a hollow shell. The laughter had claimed another. The incident seemed to galvanize Henry Graves. He found me in my compartment, his usual charming demeanor overlaid with a convincing mask of concern, almost urgency. "Vincent," he said, his voice low, intense. "This is escalating. That poor lad. We need to understand what we're dealing with. The smoking car. I've heard whispers, old tales. They say the conductor himself sometimes presides, that the answers to this train, to its peculiarities, might be found there." He leaned closer, his eyes glinting. "For your research, of course. For your story. Perhaps even for Ilara." The mention of my sister, so unexpected, so cruelly precise, was like a physical blow. How did he know? I'd never spoken her name to him. The casual way he dropped it into the conversation, a carefully placed scalpel, laid bare his true intentions. He wasn't just a passenger. He was a recruiter, a Judas goat, but his hook, barbed with my deepest grief, had found its mark. My journalistic curiosity, my desperate hope, however irrational, that some clue to Ilara's fate might lie in the heart of this haunted locomotive, overrode my fear. "What are you suggesting, Henry?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Just a look, Vincent. A brief observation. Understand the game, understand the stakes. Knowledge is power, after all. He smiled, a predatory curve of his lips. I can get you in. Nay. Know me. Against every screaming instinct, I followed him. The journey to the rearmost car was a descent into deeper decay. The lights were almost non-existent. The air thick with the smell of mildew and something else. Something acrid and ancient, like time itself rotting. The door to the smoking car was, as Henry had promised, slightly ajar. He pushed it open and we stepped inside. The air was a tangible fog of that sweet, cloying smoke. Visibility reduced to a few feet. Candles, guttering in chip saucers, cast long dancing shadows on the nicotine-stained wood paneling. Around a large circular table, draped in threadbare green felt, sat 4 figures, their faces mostly obscured by shadow and smoke. Gaunt, silent. Their eyes, when they occasionally flickered towards us, held an ancient, soul-deep weariness. They were playing with cards so worn, they seemed almost translucent. The pips faded to ghostly suggestions, and at the head of the table, or rather, where the head should be, was a presence. Not a full man, not yet, but a pair of hands, stark white against the dark felt. Above the hands, a suggestion of dark uniform, the glint of a brass button, and higher still, lost in the thickest shadows, the vague outline of a peaked conductor's cap. There was no face, only an overwhelming aura of cold, implacable authority. The conductor, Henry, one of the players rasped, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone, not looking up from his hand. You bring fresh interest. Just an observer, gentlemen, Henry said smoothly, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. A proprietary, almost possessive gesture. A scholar of your venerable institution. The conductor's gloved hands paused in their dealing. The silence in the car became absolute, a suffocating pressure. Then, one of those pale hands gestured almost imperceptibly to an empty chair. An invitation, or a command. The game has been in progress for some time, Mr. Calder, came a voice. It seemed to emanate from the shadows where the conductor's face should be. A chorus of voices, old and young, male and female, whispering in unison, yet overlaid with that distinct rustling silk and old paper quality I'd heard in my compartment. But there is always room for a new hand. The stakes are adaptable. I'm not playing, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Henry's grip tightened on my shoulder. Now, Vincent, a little participation is expected. It's how one learns. His mask of concern was gone, replaced by a cold, reptilian focus. It's how I learned. The only way to earn your passage. Earn my passage from what, Henry? I shot back, shrugging off his hand. From this curated nightmare you help orchestrate? The conductor's head, or the shadow that was his head, tilted slightly. Mr. Graves has been our most dedicated player for nearly a century. He still hopes to win back a particularly poignant memory of a summer in Biarritz 1922. Don't you, Henry? Henry flinched, his composure cracking. I play to leave, to get off this eternal damnation. Ah, but the train is eternal, Henry, the conductor's chorus voice whispered. As is the game. Someone must always deal. Someone must always play. Someone must always provide. The gloved hands resumed their dealing, placing a card before the empty chair. Your sister, Mr. Calder, Illyra, she had a fondness for games of chance, didn't she? A reckless streak. She sat in that very chair. My blood ran cold. The room seemed to tilt. She wagered her journey home. The conductor continued, its voice weaving a hypnotic, chilling tale. and she lost. Her laughter, however, her laughter still graces our dining car on occasion. Rage, cold and pure, surged through me. You lie. The Ebon Line does not lie, Mr. Calder. It merely collects. The temperature in the car plummeted. Frost began to creep across the grimy windows, forming intricate, horrifying patterns like screaming faces trapped in ice. The candlelight flickered wildly, threatening to extinguish. The conductor began to coalesce, the shadows around him darkening, solidifying hints of a gaunt, cruel face beneath the peaked cap. Eyes like burning coals. I made a pact, you see, after the derailment, 1923. The company wanted to scrap her, my beautiful Ebon Line. I couldn't allow it. I offered a service to keep her running forever. She just requires fuel. Tyler Brooks, a ghostly, more translucent version of himself than I'd ever seen, flickered into existence near the doorway, his young face etched with an eternity of sorrow. He's the one who took my harmonica, he shouted. His voice thin, reedy. Said it was the Ante for remembering my mom's face. Clara Reese appeared behind him, her face a mask of grim determination, a heavy iron wrench clutched in her hand. The game ends tonight. Espiritu maldito, she snarled. The conductor rose, or rather the shadow of him seemed to expand, to fill the car. The game never ends. Its chorus voice boomed, shaking the very carriage. And new players are always welcome. Henry, his face a mask of desperate feral cunning, lunged at me, his seat for mine. He screamed. My freedom! I sidestepped, slamming my elbow into his side. Clara swung the wrench, connecting with a shadowy limb of one of the other players, who dissolved with a sigh like escaping steam. The train bucked violently, lights exploding in a shower of sparks. The chase was on, through the lurching, time-warped carriages of the Ebon Line. The conductors enraged. Multi-voiced howl echoed behind us, promising a game with no winners, only an eternity of lost stakes. The Ebon Line had become a churning vortex of temporal chaos and spectral malice. We ran, myself, Clara, and the translucent, flickering form of Tyler, through corridors that seemed to lengthen and twist with every lurch of the train. Doors slammed shut in our faces, only to reappear further down. The dim lights pulsed erratically, sometimes flaring to reveal glimpses of other eras, gaslight fixtures, plush Edwardian upholstery, before plunging us back into near darkness. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, hot metal, and that cloying funereal sweetness, now intermingled with the sharp, acrid smell of the conductor's rage. The engine! Clara yelled over the cacophony, her voice strained. He's tied to it! The original accident. The point it all broke. We have to disrupt the heart. She brandished the heavy wrench, her knuckles white. Her family, she'd gasped earlier, had been trying to find a way to stop the conductor for generations. Ever since her great-grandfather, a railwayman, had been one of the first collected. Tyler flickered beside us, sometimes solid, sometimes little more than a shimmer of static. He hates the whistle, the boy cried, his voice thin but urgent. The original steam whistle from the old engine. My grandpa told me stories. Said it was the only thing that could make the shadows shrink back. He pointed a wavering finger towards the front of the train. It's still there, in the old locomotive. If we can reach it, the pursuit was relentless. The conductor didn't need to physically run. His presence was everywhere. His chorus voice whispering threats, temptations. Alara's name a constant, tormenting refrain in my ears. Shadowy, elongated figures, the things from the tunnel windows, clawed at us from darkened compartments. Their touch icy, draining. One nearly dragged Clara down, its pale, featureless face inches from hers, before Tyler, surprisingly, solidified enough to shove it back with a desperate, ghostly cry. We found Mrs. Bellamy in the observation car, or what was left of it. The plush seats were ripped, the panoramic windows cracked and webbed, showing not the passing landscape, but swirling, nebular vistas of impossible colors and screaming, distorted faces. She was knitting furiously, her yarn now a glistening blood-red skein. "The final stitch is always the hardest, dears," she murmured, not looking up as we passed. "It is unraveling time to keep you here." Henry Graves, battered but driven by a desperate feral energy, reappeared, blocking a narrow connecting passage between cars. His eyes burned with a century of frustrated desire for escape. "You won't take my chance?" he snarled, lunging at me. "My seat, my life back." The train gave a particularly violent heave. I stumbled, and Henry seized the opportunity, tackling me. We wrestled on the swaying floor, the abyss of the rushing track a blur through the open gangway doors. He was surprisingly strong, fueled by decades of spectral imprisonment. Just as his fingers closed around my throat, Tyler, with a cry that was half boy, half banshee, flickered through Henry. Henry screamed, a sound of pure, agonizing cold, and recoiled, clutching his chest as if his very essence had been violated. He scrambled back, his eyes wide with a new, more profound terror than even the conductor had inspired. "The engine car!" Clara screamed, pointing. It was just ahead, a monstrous, archaic shape belching black, acrid smoke that smelled of hellfire and despair. As we burst through the final door, the heat was a physical blow. The engine room was a Dantean vision. Ghostly firemen, their forms flickering like heat haze, shoveled spectral coal into a roaring, infernal firebox that pulsed with an unnatural, sickly green light. At its heart, entwined with pipes and levers like a malignant tumor, was the conductor. He was more solid here, his form almost complete, his cruel, shadowed face turned towards us, eyes burning with cold, ancient fury. "You cannot stop the Ebon Line." His chorus voice boomed, shaking the very metal beneath our feet. "She is my heart, and I am hers. We run forever." The air in the engine car thrummed with a power that was both ancient and utterly corrupt. The conductor, a towering shadow wreathed in sickly green light, and the tormented whispers of 1,000 souls, raised a gloved hand. The ghostly firemen turned, their empty sockets fixing on us. "The original whistle," Tyler shrieked, pointing a translucent finger towards a massive tarnished brass lever high on the boiler. "It's a dead man's switch. If he can't hold it, the loop, it might break." Clara, with a warrior's cry, charged, swinging the heavy wrench at one of the spectral firemen, the metal passing through it with a sound like tearing silk and a discharge of cold static. It bought us a precious second. "Elara played for escape, Vincent." The conductor's voice boomed, laced with mocking laughter that echoed the children in the dining car. "She wagered her memory of your face against a sunrise she'd never see. A foolish bet." His words, meant to break me, instead fueled a white-hot rage. I scrambled up the side of the boiler, the metal hot beneath my hands even through the ambient chill. The conductor lunged, his shadowy fingers elongating, tipped with claws of solidified darkness. I ducked, feeling an icy burn as one raked across my arm. Below, Clara fought like a demon, the wrench a blur, disrupting the ghostly firemen, their forms flickering and weakening with each near impact. Tyler, bless his spectral heart, darted around the conductor, a distracting, shimmering net, his thin voice yelling out the names of other trapped souls, other broken rules, each name seeming to cause the conductor a flicker of discomfort. I reached the whistle lever. It was stiff, cold, coated in something that felt like centuries of solidified despair. I pulled with all my might. For a moment, nothing. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, it began to move. The conductor roared, a sound that was pure, multi-voiced agony. He turned his full attention on me, his form surging upwards. The pact cannot be undone. As the lever reached its nadir, a sound erupted from the whistle that was unlike anything I had ever heard. It wasn't just steam. It was a banshee wail. 1,000 tortured voices released in a single deafening, soul-shattering blast. The sickly green light in the firebox pulsed violently, then shattered into a million dying embers. The ghostly firemen screamed and dissolved into wisps of acrid smoke. The train bucked like a dying beast, a horrible grinding screech tearing through its ancient frame. The conductor shrieked, his form flickering, shrinking, the chorus of voices within him fracturing into individual cries of pain and confusion. He reached for me, for the whistle, but his hand passed through the lever, through me, as if he were becoming intangible. The loop. And then you began to fray, Clara yelled, her voice hoarse, pointing at the windows where the swirling nebulae were being replaced by streaks of something like dawn. Then Henry Graves, his face a mask of ultimate selfish desperation, appeared from the connecting doorway. My chance, he shrieked, and instead of attacking me, he lunged for the conductor, or rather, for the fading locus of his power. Take me, release me from the game. I'll be your conductor. I know the rules. For a horrifying instant, the conductor's burning eyes seemed to focus on Henry with a flicker of ancient cold amusement. A shadowy tendril lashed out, not to attack, but to envelop. Henry screamed, a sound that was quickly absorbed, his form dissolving into the conductor's retreating shadow, which then, with a final despairing sigh that echoed Ilara's name, seemed to be sucked back into the dying heart of the engine, consumed to be sucked back into the dying heart of the engine. By its own failing magic, the train gave one last, monumental shudder, and then I was falling. The world dissolved into a cacophony of noise, light, and the tearing of metal. I woke up hours or perhaps days later, lying in a ditch by a stretch of sun-drenched, utterly ordinary railway track. Miles from any station, my arm was bandaged crudely with a strip of what looked like Clara's uniform. My camera was smashed. Of the Ebon Line, there was no sign. Only the indentation in the gravel where something immensely heavy had recently rested. They found me eventually, dehydrated, incoherent. My story was dismissed, of course. A breakdown, a fugitive anachronism. Clara and Tyler were never found, nor was Henry. Mrs. Bellamy simply wasn't. I tried to publish what I knew. No one would touch it. I still work, but trains, tunnels, they hold a permanent icy dread. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind is right, I hear the faint clatter of wheels on a distant, unseen track. And I find myself humming that old, melancholic tune. A few weeks ago, I received an unmarked envelope. No return address. Inside, there was no note. Just a single, elegantly printed new ticket for the Ebon Line. Destination, pending. And tucked beside it, a worn, intricately carved wooden game token. The initials VC freshly, if a little shakily, etched into its surface. The conductor, or whatever now wore his mantle, remembered my face. And the game, it seems, was far from over.